Hola, it's Joe Pardavila. Thanks for joining me once again for the Forbes Books podcast. And for many folks, the word Monday creates a visceral reaction. Just the mere mention of Monday can stir up all sorts of emotions, mostly negative. I mean, there isn't a restaurant chain called TGI Mondays. But my guest today has made it his mission in life to help the men and women in the corner office make sure that Monday morning doesn't suck for their employees. His name is Eric Harkins, and he's the president and founder of GKG Search and Consulting, a Minneapolis-based consulting firm that helps organizations get talent, keep talent, and grow talent. He's also the author of the fantastic book, Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck. Hey there, Eric.
Hey, good morning, Joe. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And let's start out of the box with a really heady question. Why do you think some people are bad leaders?
Boy, let's get right into it.
I don't want to waste any time, Eric. Let's go.
Right. That's right. Well, listen, it's interesting. I spent 25 years, as I like to say, getting my ass kicked through corporate America and really looking around saying, what was it that made a leader good? What was it that made a leader bad? And, I don't know that there's one specific answer to that question. I think there's a number of factors from their own confidence in what they're doing, how they were maybe led in early stages of their career. And, I came up with this saying a long time ago that, listen, if you lead people, at the end of the day, you really only have one job, right? Your only job as a leader is to make sure Monday morning doesn't suck. And it usually gets a little bit of a laugh. But when I start to talk to leaders about what are the things that need to occur, how do you need to show up, how do you need to lead so that you build a team, that high performers really are excited about being a part of. And it makes for some really engaging conversations. And, it's basic things. I mean, it's, do they bring energy and enthusiasm, right? Do they understand what it means to build a culture for high performers? Do they allow poor performers to show up every day? And there's an old saying, and I certainly didn't come up with it, that, A players like to work with A players. And so I think oftentimes it's that, that particular leader is not a high potential engaged leader. They're not supporting the direction of their company. And so at the end of the day, they don't know what good looks like because that's not what they're trying to create.
And, one of the things I've picked up from, speaking to you in the past and reading your book is the word enthusiasm gets used. Now, Eric, you and I are pretty obnoxious human beings, so
That's right.
Enthusiasm is pretty easy. But what about people who don't have sort of that genetic trait? I mean, is there a way to work around that where you're not and I hate to use this like the rah guy, but you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not the person who's like magnetic or has this big personality, how can you lead and have enthusiasm without being sort of a quote unquote enthusiastic person?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I get that question a lot. Hey, Eric, I'm not the person that walks down the hall and high fives people like you. And I always say that's not what it's about. Energy and enthusiasm is about, do you have the ability to get your team excited about what's taking place in your organization? So you walk into a room or you log on to Zoom and you're having a meeting and you're participating in that meeting. Is it engaging? Do they seem excited to be there? Do they understand what the company's trying to accomplish? You don't need to be a cheerleader to do that, but can you sit with your team and talk to your team about what's going on in a way that they not just understand the direction of the company, but they get excited about it? And I talk about in the book that, when I was at Target Corporation and GE in the 80s was kind of famous for this, they came up with this ease of excellence, E''S. And it was very simple. Energy plus enthusiasm plus execution equals excellence. And that's all you should look for in your leaders. And when I was at Target, I took it one day and I said, hey, instead of E''S, what if it's EASE, right? If you don't naturally have some energy, if you can't get your team excited, certainly at the end of the day, if you can't execute, then you're probably not going to be effective as a leader. So it isn't about doing cartwheels or riding the scooter around the office if you're back in the office now, but it is about being able to get high potential people excited about working in your company.
And in terms, you're the leadership expert, but I always feel like the best leaders are the best communicator, because regardless of your enthusiasm level or whether you have any or not, I think if you communicate your employees and have a lot of transparency, I think that goes a long way, because I think the problem most people have with their company is just like, hey, I don't know what's going on. Nobody tells me anything. Like you hear that all the time from people, and you could be the greatest leader in the world, but if you don't communicate to people, it goes for naught, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. And it's such a great observation. And think about how many times you've had a conversation with somebody and, hey, we just talked to, whatever your boss's name is. We just talked to Mike and I can't believe that we're doing this new, rollout. Isn't that cool? Well, I haven't heard about that. When did Mike tell you that? Oh, well, we had a leadership team meeting last week and he shared it. And now you've just created this bigger divide between the good leaders and the not good leaders of, to your point, the great leaders communicating to their team. That's part of getting them excited about what's going on. It's also really important that they're communicating it in a way that their team understands they are just as excited as, the company, whether that was the board or the CEO or whoever set this direction. That's a whole nother conversation that we'll probably get into, but that ability to really support the direction of the company without any, as I like to say, hidden agendas, because your teams can tell if it's genuine. And yes, a great leader is genuine in their communication, thoughtful about cascading relevant information, and certainly makes sure that the high potential leaders in their organization have the information they need to be successful.
And you mentioned the word meeting in there. So I feel like we're very much in this meeting culture, whether it's virtual or in person. But do you feel that a lot of times meetings are being done for just the sake of meetings and not really that all productive?
If it's a leader who is not a high potential leader, yes, absolutely. And, I talk about it all the time. Are your meetings with your team, agenda based or conversation based? And I always draw the distinction between, is it a, jump on the call? I've got my checklist because I owe my boss an answer. Right. I want to find out where we're at with everything. Or a great leader understands that high potential leaders don't need agenda based conversations. Hey, Joe, I know we have an hour. Really, I only have one question for you this morning. What do you need from me to help you accomplish whatever you're working on? Because I know you got a lot going on. Is there anything I can do to help? Nope, Eric, I got it covered. All right, great. Hey, how are the kids? How was your game last night? Hey, then why do you need to go? A high potential employee does not need to be followed up on day after day. And I love having this conversation with leaders that, listen, if you have to follow up with somebody consistently, if you don't know where they're at with key initiatives or projects, then I hate to break it to you, but they're probably not a high potential employee, because high potential employees don't need that level of, follow up and micromanagement. What they need is block and tackle. Here's what I need. I've been trying to get this thing signed. Can you get it across the finish line for me? And then let's spend the rest of the time getting to know each other on an individual level.
And I picked up on the phrase high potential employee. How does Eric Harkins define a high potential employee?
Yeah, it is so interesting how much I think companies underestimate the value of high potential and the damage, candidly, that is done when an organization or a leader does not understand that you will never, ever create a culture that high performers want to be a part of if you allow underperformers to work in your organization. And as simple as that sounds and as obvious as that sounds. And so, a big basis of the book is a tool that I developed called LEAD. And LEAD stands for Leadership Expectations and Development. And it's kind of 8 simple questions that you ask of your leaders. And when I have this conversation about what's the difference between a high potential employee and a poor performing, how do you draw that distinction? Many of the same bullet points on this sort of LEAD assessment apply, right? A high potential employee brings energy and enthusiasm to work every day. A high potential employee builds relationships at all levels of the organization. They support the direction of the company. They're decisive and they can make a tough call or make a decision if they need to without a lot of direction. They consistently deliver results and they kind of share wins and recognition with others, and they're viewed as somebody that people like working with. So those are just a few bullets that I'll usually talk about. Hey, do they do these things? And when they don't, and they're not consistently delivering results and they're not bringing energy and enthusiasm and people don't like working with them, you probably have some deeper conversation and reflection that you need to have about their contributions.
And one of the things I love about your writing style is it's very blunt. You throw around the a-hole word from time to time. So right. Let me ask you this. How do you sort of, I guess, either combine or sort of separate the two, the high potential employee who can be an asshole.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that kind of person?
Yeah, well, it's funny because you mentioned it. So, I talk about these three in the book. I talk about these three lessons I've learned along the way, but I tell the story about how they became rules later in my career and how much more important and impactful that was. And lesson number one is it's okay to have fun at work. And lesson number two is poor performing employees don't quit voluntarily. And lesson number three is assholes are assholes, they don't change. And I'll always have people ask, hey, what's your definition of an asshole? And I always love to say, I have no idea what the definition of an asshole is, but I know who they are in every company I've ever worked in. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And if there was one overarching sort of obvious glaring thing that separates them, it's probably how they treat everyone in the organization. Does everyone get treated with the same level of respect, regardless of the position that they have, right? Does the most entry-level individual contributor get the same type of conversation, engagement, respect as the most senior-level person in the organization? Or is it somebody, whether they're a leader or not, that picks and chooses how they interact with others based on what they think it's going to do for them versus genuinely coming into the organization saying, hey, every single position here has equal importance, because if we don't all work towards the same goals and objectives, then none of this is going to work. But, it's kind of a provocative. I do like to use a lot of bad words, as they say in my book. And some of it's just for effect of, hey, let's get the conversation started. So I always love, having this kind of dialogue, because it opens up some pretty interesting specific examples when you really start asking questions about particular styles or behaviors or attitudes or the people that you have in your organization.
So when you're dealing with these a-holes, to keep it short, do you is it in sort of like the realm of you're putting culture over profits or profitability because you don't want this person, even though they may be what you would describe as a high potential employee, but they are this a-hole? Where do you cross that bridge when it's like, hey, listen, this person is like exactly what we want. They're performing at a high level, but they're this person as well. And then you're like, hey, listen, it's not working for us. Because at that point, you're right. You're putting culture before anything else.
Right.
Even if this person is bringing in, hitting all their KPIs, bringing in a lot of money, but you've got to accept that the culture will sort of be sort of hindered because of this individual.
Absolutely. There's the old saying, and I wish I'd come up with it because I believe it 100%, but, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm a big believer of that. And you mentioned it as you were talking, that it's interesting, but it's oftentimes a conversation within or about a sales organization inside of a company. If I've had 20 of these conversations, 19 of them have been about sales, because it is tough, because they are bringing in the revenue. They are the rainmaker. They're the top performing salesperson. However, if they're in a leadership role and they're leaving a wake that's 10 miles wide, and they hit 135% of their sales goal, but the next closest person hit, 80. And I'll always ask a leader, they'll say to me, wait, are you honestly telling me that I may need to make a change with my top performing, salesperson or revenue generator for the organization? And I'll say, yeah, because what would happen if the 8 people on the team or the 5 people on the team or however many you have, what would it look like if they all did 100% and you didn't have 200% turnover because nobody likes working on that team, and your leader maybe did 80%? Let's just do the math on that. And when you start doing the math, you kind of see the light bulb moment. But it's tough, Joe. I mean, it's a gut check moment. When I consult with companies and we roll out this lead tool, on the front end, I always say, listen, the easy part is deciding you want to roll something out like lead. The hard part is when we actually do the assessment. And I know we didn't get into all of the specifics, but 8 simple questions, I mentioned a bunch of them, that you ask of your leaders. And when you do that assessment in any company, it doesn't matter what you're selling. It doesn't matter, how many people you have in your organization. If you do that assessment correctly, and when I say correctly, I mean honestly and genuinely having tough reflection on each leader against each of those questions, you are going to have two outcomes. You will identify some people in your organization who are not going to be part of your future, and you are going to identify some people who are going to be a huge part of your future. And that's often a really difficult time because I think leaders and companies often let three things get in the way. Tenure trump performance. They let relationships trump performance. And as you just mentioned, they let performance trump behavior. And it's this saying that, how you get the results has to be as important to you as an organization as the results themselves. So behavior has to be just as important as results. And it's hard. It's not easy. And, listen, again, if I've done 20 consulting engagements, maybe half of the companies follow it through all the way because it's very hard. Well, I've known them since college. They were our top performer for 10 years. Yeah, but they haven't delivered for the last 5. Yeah, but, they made our circle of excellence in 2005. Well, that's great. That's 16 years ago. And you just start to really have that honest conversation, but it's not easy. And it's hard because I do think that those three things oftentimes get in the way.
Do you think that's one of the biggest shifts you've seen over your 25-year career? Let's not get into the pandemic just yet, but in terms of the fact that culture has become more of a open topic. Obviously, if you go into a bookstore, you'll trip over all the culture books that are written about business and everything. But is that one of the biggest changes, that culture has become so upfront with an organization and people wanting to know what kind of culture they're getting into?
I think so. And I think especially, and yeah, maybe we'll get into, post-pandemic or during pandemic, but there are lots of opportunities for good leaders and good employees, but there are even more opportunities for great leaders and great employees. And, there has been this shift of, what am I willing to, tolerate? So, I worked for a leader, and, I'd like to say it was 25 years ago. It wasn't. That not that long ago, every Friday at 4:30, the CEO would walk the halls and literally take notes on, which departments were filled with people and which departments weren't. And then there'd be a report back to that leader of, hey, looked like a lot of your team kind of left early that day. Versus, wow, you guys have hit every one of your objectives. Sort of, it doesn't really matter in this day and age of 24/7 connectivity, kind of when and where we work. Do I have to be sitting at my desk all the time to be effective? No. And so it's just sort of traditional paradigms that have been challenged, partly because of technology and the world that we live in. And I think, partly of, what's important to somebody who's 22 isn't what was maybe as important to me or even my, parents or their parents, because we've evolved on what we value when we go to work and maybe equally important these days, what we value when we're not at work.
And do you think another shift that we're seeing too is the fact that employees are now being paid for their talent, not their time, where, as Gen Xers, we probably just remember, 9 to 5, you got to be sitting in your desk at 9, then you can leave at 5 o'clock. Whereas now we're more looking for putting more of the onus on what's being done as opposed to how long you're there. That's definitely a shift you've seen, right, pretty recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last, certainly I'll say 10 years, I think some of this evolution started in maybe the 2008 and 2009 recession, as there were mass layoffs and people had to go out and, figure out what they were going to do next. But I love to talk about, in the book, I mentioned this, this question that I'll always ask, like, why do you care if somebody goes to a movie at 2:00 on a Tuesday? And the answer is always, well, because I don't pay them to go to a movie, I pay them to get their job done. It's like, exactly. Are they getting their job done? It's a yes or no question, right? Do they perform at a high level? That's a yes or no question too. Are they engaged? Do they bring energy and enthusiasm? Are they high potential? And you just start going down that list. And it's hard because, they'll keep coming back to, but I don't pay them to, go to a movie. And it's like, yeah, but that's not what you paid them to do. They left to go to their kids' band concert. But you know what? They logged on when they got home and they actually sent you the report you needed 2 days ahead of when you needed it. So why are we even having this conversation? And it's fun to watch people's, paradigms get challenged. But it's traditional thinking. And you're right. I mean, listen, my dad was a high school teacher for 34 years. He went to the same classroom every day and then retired. And they threw him a retirement party. And, those days are gone, right? And it's not, if you're a teacher, you're probably still going into the classroom or logging on. But we've evolved, and I do think you're right. I think that it's more about culture than checking the box of, I was in my desk by 8:30, I left at 5, and, that CEO who walked the hall at 4:45 on Friday, put me in the category of good because I was sitting there. They might be the worst performing employee you have because they quit, but they never gave you your notice. And that's one of the biggest, I think, issues that companies have that they don't address. Unfortunately, every company has employees who quit. They just haven't given their notice. They show up every day, but to your point, they're just checking the box. They're sitting there. They're visible.
Eric, how do you, as a leader, figure that out, though? Because a lot of times, the term silos get thrown around where everyone's in their own silo, and if the leader just sees that this person is hitting their quotas or KPIs, OKRs, whatever acronym you want to use there, how do you know that person is not literally but figuratively quit?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the bullets that I rattled off, right? I mean, are they engaged, right? Are they bringing energy to the conversations that you have? Not needing to do cartwheels, not needing to do high fives, but are they engaged in that discussion? Unsolicited feedback is one of my best and favorite sort of benchmarks. And what I mean by that is I led for 21 of my 25 years, I led human resources functions. I was lucky enough to be the head of HR 3 different times, but I had some operations and sales experience along the way as well. But for a support function like HR, I knew if I had a high-performing employee when I got unsolicited feedback. Hey, I just wanted to let you know, Tommy is great. I mean, I'm so happy that he's our business partner. Versus me having to follow up. Hey, how's Tommy doing? He's fine. And it's sort of an indifferent response. And that's not just about a support function like HR or IT or finance. Think about that for any of you who are leaders. When was the last time somebody else gave you unsolicited feedback? Because high performers get unsolicited feedback. And people who like to work with an engaged, high-performing employee will let others know.
And I guess that almost goes back to our original conversation about being a good or bad leader, is the fact that you create this environment that accepts unsolicited feedback. Because the term unsolicited can have
That's fair.
negative connotations.
Sure.
So if you're not a good leader, no one's going to be like, hey, by the way, this Eric Harkins, he's really good. If the guy's going to be like, hey, don't tell me anything about Eric. I know everything I need to know about Eric. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a great leader gets to know their team at an individual enough level that they know enough about them to understand what's going to get them excited. And I talk about this a lot in my consulting and in the book, that it always amazes me how many leaders don't take the time to get to know their team, but more importantly, don't take any time letting their team get to know them. And there's some simple exercises that we talk about. They're not very complicated, but they're about this, right? Let's just get to know each other. Because if I spend time, like I said, not always just having a check the box, agenda-based team call or status or check-in, but hey, tell me what's going on. I want to get to know you. What are you working on outside of work? Because I think really great leaders, let their team know that they care about them as much when they're not at work as when they are. And I referenced it earlier. That line's gray. We joke about it, we laugh about it, but we are all connected, right? We're all a text away or a Slack away from an interaction or a response. So does my team know that I care about them just as much as when they're not at work physically as when they are? Hey, I know you're training for that half marathon. How was your run yesterday? Did you get out? What can I do to help? Well, there's a running group that's Tuesdays at 10 a.m., but I didn't think I was going to be able to make. Well, what are you talking about? Why not? Well, we have our status at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Well, I don't care. We'll have our status on Wednesday. Go and do it. It's not that hard, but I think the leaders who don't have those kind of conversations, and you said it, just transparent. Hey, what can I do to make your job easier? At the end of the day, if you're a great leader, that's really the only question you're ever really asking. What do you need from me? What are you not getting? And let me see how I can help with that.
And it almost seems that it almost seems like there's always like a new phrase being born every day. But one of the things
Right.
that you hear a lot about nowadays is soft skills. Now, if you used the phrase soft skills 20 years ago, people are like, what does that even mean? But now
Right.
soft skills are a big part of it. And going back to what you were just talking about is sometimes a leader may have the MBA, go to a fancy school, have an amazing upbringing, be a fantastic gentleman or lady, but they don't have the soft skills to be a leader, to be able to massage people, not physically, obviously, but massage
Right.
people and their personalities. How about that? How do you talk to people
Yeah.
who have trouble with those soft skills?
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? I mean, I do tend to, as you said, I have a little edginess to some of my points of view, and I did a LinkedIn post a couple weeks ago that it evoked a lot of emotion from people, but the post was basically, leadership is either something you have or you don't, right? It can't be taught. And there was some really good engaged, like, well, of course it can be taught. No, it can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. And what you're talking about, I do think is something that you either bring to an organization or you don't, right? Are you the person as a leader who always makes time for anyone who needs time, regardless of their level? Like I said, and in the book I talk about, if you have a receptionist in your office, are you the leader that always stops when you walk in and, hey, how was your day? How was your weekend? Or do you walk right by them because they're not, important in your world? And, we are who we are. And so, you can't, I think a really great leader is also somebody who is genuine and authentic in their desire to get to know somebody.
Eric, I don't think it's something that you could probably teach, but I think it's something you could probably get better at soft skills. Like you were talking, for example, like the leader who decides to say hi to people in the office. It doesn't require a lot of energy or time to say, hey, how was your weekend? So I think
Right.
if you are actively thinking about it and putting it in the forefront as opposed to burying it way deep in your mind underneath the 110 things you have to do that day, I think if you just show even a little effort in those soft skills, I think that
Yes.
goes a long way too.
Oh, I agree. And as long as it's authentic and genuine,
Yeah.
right? Because people see fake. So, hey, I just, got coaching from my leader that I need to get to know my team. And now all of a sudden we're doing something we've never done before,
Right.
but it's very robotic.
Right.
It's not very natural.
Let's do
It just feels-
exercises.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to take us all out for a drink tonight. Like, well, you do? Because it sure doesn't seem like you do. Well, I was told I had to. Oh, okay. Well, now we understand. But yes, listen, we absolutely can be aware of things. We can take coaching as adults. Adults don't really change, but yes, you can absolutely refine behaviors. But I'm telling you, if it doesn't come across as genuine, and if you're not doing it because you truly want to, you're doing it was because you were told you had to, your team's going to know, specifically your high potential and high performers are going to know. And that's where it tends to break down.
Yeah. I think what's funny too, as we've progressed over the last 20 years, and you and I both sort of, in the same generational pocket there, it's funny how now everyone knows what every other business is doing. So everyone can see, oh, okay, we're only doing this because that other company did it. Like, as you
Right,
probably saw
right.
during the pandemic, everyone's doing a virtual happy hour. I'm like, oh, really?
Right.
You're only doing it because because the other company's doing it. So I think it's very hard for leaders, I think, now to sort of be like, hey, I have this groundbreaking idea. And be like, no, you don't. Someone
Right,
else is already doing that.
Right. Well, and as simple as this sounds, I have so many conversations with leaders. We're having a conversation like this, and they'll say something like, "Well, how do I know?" And this sounds so obvious, but I'll always say, "Well, just ask." Right. So one of my favorite concepts is, I think, and you just talked about the generation, and we don't have to date ourselves too much, but yep, I think we're in that same realm. 80s heavy metal is probably one of our favorite music genres.
More of a hairband guy, but go
Yeah,
ahead,
sure. But I have never bought into the argument about, multi-generations in the workplace are difficult, or, Gen X or Gen Z or whatever Gen is ruining the work. Because I truly believe if you're 22, you're just starting your career, or you're 62 and you're on the home stretch, you want three things when you come to work. You want a cool place with cool projects and cool people. And a cool place is either a brand or a product. It might even be the physical office. There's something about the company that you're connected to. You're proud to say you work at this company. Cool projects, right? Is the work engaging and rewarding? Am I recognized for my contributions? And cool people has to be the company's commitment that they're not going to let bad leaders lead people. And I have 100 times in the last, 10 years, I've said to somebody, ask your team, is this a cool place with cool projects and cool people? You don't even have to define it for them. Just throw those 3 things out there and then just listen. And it's going to take a little bit of time if you don't have that relationship, if you haven't gotten to know your team at an individual level. But if you ask that question enough, eventually people will answer. And I promise you're going to get some really, really valuable feedback that you can act on if you just ask those 3 simple things. I was on a call. I did a presentation to a bunch of executives who were in transition. They are looking for their next role. And somebody said, well, as a candidate, how can I tell, right? How can I tell if they have this culture that you're describing? And I said, ask them. I said, really, the next time one of you, and these were pretty senior level executives, I said, the next time you're talking to a CEO and interviewing with a CEO, ask them, hey, I'm just curious, what do you do as a leadership team to make sure Monday morning doesn't suck? And depending on their answer, now they maybe have never heard a question like that phrased that way, but if they like the question and engage in the answer, you probably got your answer. And if they are taken back by that question and sort of avoid it, then you definitely got your answer.
And, we alluded to it earlier, Eric, and the pandemic, and let's sort of fast forward to, hopefully, as we, use the phrase light at the end of the tunnel here. But do you worry now, or maybe leaders worry about overcorrection? Because as you remember, at the height of the pandemic, most companies were like, we're going to be remote for the rest of our lives. No more coming in from the office. So it was almost like this incredible overcorrection that was taking place, as opposed to people just saying, hey, listen, we're going to go virtual for a little while. Let's see how it goes. How do you, for leaders who may be listening to this, be like, hey, how do I not go way too far where I can't come back from? Because all these companies now, for the example I used about that switch to a complete remote, now they can't be all of a sudden be like, hey, now that we got a vaccine, everybody come on back to work. So how do you sort of like toe that line of overcorrecting? And obviously I'm using the pandemic as an example, but in general, how do you refrain from doing that?
Yeah, wow. The most emotional conversation taking place right now, right? It's so fluid. One of my favorite sayings is, hey, sometimes you just have to build the plane in midair. And we are building this plane in midair for sure. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of perspective. There's a lot of opinion. And I do think that, yes, I do think there was some overcorrection on both sides and in any topic, absolutely. And, at the same time, you have to be true about who you are as an organization and what you value and what is important and understand that, some people aren't going to want to work in that environment, and that's okay. I think this return to work conversation right now, and I truly believe this, that I think there's 2 conversations taking place. I think there's a conversation right now of, oh, I can't believe we have to go back on August 1st. And there's a conversation taking place of, oh, I'm so excited we get to go back on August 1st. And what's the difference in those 2 environments, right? Well, one of them is an environment where Monday morning doesn't suck. And the other one is probably an environment where it does. And in the new book, I wrote some additional content and wrote a couple new chapters. And one of the chapters' titles is, there are a-holes on Zoom too. And the whole concept is, I believe that people who had an engaged boss, who enjoyed where they worked, they felt it was a cool place with cool projects and cool people before the pandemic, had a probably fairly seamless, it was difficult for everyone to kind of adjust and figure out how to work remote and the kids at home and all the variables. But, they had this engaged boss who understood and had gotten to know them at an individual enough level that I think their transition to working remotely was probably fairly easy or easier than that person who did not have the engaged boss, who's frustrated that they can't walk the halls and check the box at 4:30 on Friday to see who's there, and that their paradigms are based on checking the box versus getting to know people and create a culture that they want to be a part of. And there isn't one answer, right? And that's what makes the conversation hard. If you're an owner of the business, or you're the CEO, or your board of directors, has an expectation that we want it to look like this post-pandemic, then I think you have to, be okay with that. But that means not everyone, may want to work in whatever the expectations are that you're setting. And I think people and most companies are trying to find the balance, right? What's a balance of, it's not going to go back to the far end on this side. It's not going to, go to the far end on the other side, but what's a respectable, fractional return to work program that values your life at work and outside of work? We've talked a few times about, how gray that area is these days anyway. And having, open and honest and candid conversations with your team about expectations and listening to that feedback, and then ultimately, communicating a vision that you truly feel is best for everyone involved.
And one thing a lot of leaders have to do too, Eric, is really look within when it comes to, returning people to the office, and how much of the culture really was there. Because culture could be a mirage to a lot of these places, because a boss may be like, hey, listen, I want everybody to return to work to be just like it was before the pandemic. And then if you look at it and like, well, how often did you walk up to an employee and say hi? How often did employees really mingle with each other? So I think that's another thing too, is like, what did things look like before the pandemic? Were we really an organization where everyone was like, jumping in each other's offices, having these open dialogues, or was everyone just sort of sitting in their own offices working?
Yeah.
And who cares if they're remote or not? Because don't you think you have to sort of almost look at yourself being like, hey, what does this company need to look like, instead of me being, oh, okay, everyone's going back to work, so let's bring everybody back to work.
Absolutely, and 100%. And there's two things. So that company that said, well, we didn't really have that great of a culture before, so how's it going to be any different now?
Right.
I promise there's two reasons for that. One is the leaders that you have in your organization, and two is the amount of underperforming, or as I like to say, poor performing employees who you allow to show up every day. Because if you have a high potential employee who is delivering and over-delivering and supporting the direction of the company and is all in and brings energy and enthusiasm, and they sit day after day either in the cube or in the square next to them on Zoom, and watching that person underperform, and watching you as the leader tolerate that underperformance day after day after day, you're going to lose that person. And I have a concept of address the one or lose the nine. And any team of 10 people, I promise, has one person who is not living up to the expectation you need them to. Doesn't mean they necessarily need to be fired. It may end up in that. But if you don't address that behavior and hold that person accountable, you're going to lose the other 9 people. 3 of them are going to go to your competitor. 3 of them are going to model that behavior because you've let it be acceptable. And as we already talked about, 3 of them are going to quit, but they never give you their notice. Because think about somebody in your life who actually really likes their boss, who really likes their coworkers because they work with other high potential engaged employees. I promise you, the conversation of we have to go back versus we get to go back looks different.
And let's wrap up this leadership chat, Eric, of talking about great leaders. If obviously you being a leadership expert, who is in your leadership Hall of Fame? Like, if you had an opportunity to get it like Canton Hall of Fame for football, like 3 busts or even 2 busts, who do you think's in there for you?
A couple people come to mind, and I reference him in the book. But my first boss and mentor for years, when I made a shift from operations to human resources, Dan, and he knows who he is, and we've had some great conversations after the book came out. And here's what Dan did, right? And I'm going to go back to lead. And anyone who's going to be on this list checks the box on these 8 simple things. They create a culture high performers want to be a part of. They bring energy and enthusiasm to work every day. They build relationships at all levels of the organization. They support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas. They're decisive. They make the tough call when it needs to be made. They manage the performance of their teams. They consistently deliver results. And they help the company grow by developing people. And as simple as those are, nobody's ever read that list and said, whoa, Eric, where'd you come up with that? It's not rocket science, it's common sense. But looking across leaders that I worked with or for over my 25 years, consistently did those things, every single day, not because they were told they had to, but because they wanted to. And I think the other qualifier that I would put out there is, my wife has a boss who did not need to read my book, and he checks all the boxes of what a great leader does. And what he does more than anything else is he helps my wife feel and understand that he knows she's a high potential employee. And he doesn't get caught up in little things that didn't happen, because he knows ultimately, she's delivering everything and more that he needs her to on a consistent basis. And she respects that, he's not micromanaging her, and he's leaving her alone to do what she wants to do. And so there's a mutual respect there built on, as we talked about earlier, what do you need from me to get your job done? And that's what I want to do. And I think the great leaders do those things. And I was lucky enough to have a few of those leaders along the way, but I was even luckier to have most of the leaders who weren't like that, because you learn from both.
His name is Eric Harkins. He is the author of Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck. Eric, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I wish you the best of luck with your book and your upcoming podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Joe. Really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to another one down the road.
Absolutely, and that is it for this edition of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.